Mr. Harold Good is one of the many heroes who served during the Korean War. He was born on January 31st, 1932 in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. He enlisted into the Air Force during the Korean War, and his highest rank achieved was sergeant. He grew up with 2 brothers and 3 sisters, and both brothers were in the military as well. But during World War II,
Mr. Good enlisted into the Air Force, and he then spent the next 4 years traveling throughout the United States serving his country. He began at the crowded Lackawanna Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas, where he underwent basic training.
At the time, there were so many guys joining the Air Force, it was overloaded. There was no room in barracks for us. They put us out in tents. In the summertime, we'd be marching and training, and it'd be 80, 85 degrees. And at night, it was terrible cold. It seemed colder there than it did when I was up in Alaska. It was so cold, and we didn't have all our uniforms. We only had one blanket. And there was one guy who caught pneumonia, and they thought he was going to die, and he was a senator's son, and I guess because of that, they shipped us all out, and I had to complete my basic training in Biloxi, Mississippi.
Once he completed basic training, he was stationed in a hangar where they called radio operators, where he was in charge of restricted material. After almost a year, he traveled to Camp Stolman, California, and from there went to San Francisco, where he boarded a boat headed for Alaska.
While stationed on a ship in Alaska, Mr. Good had an experience he will never forget.
Icebergs. It was very, very rough. Most of the people on there got sick. I was down in the lower compartment, which was, I think, called compartment C, and it was so rough. At times, the ship would come out of the water, and you could hear the propellers in the back. The boat would shatter. It was quite an experience. I'll never forget that. First time I went to the mess hall, got in line, you had a tray, and you went down a bar there with your tray, slid it along there to get your food. All at once, the ship went like this. All the trays went off, slid off. It was quite an experience. Guys were sick. It was all.
Once he safely reached Alaska, Mr. Good went to survival school. He was taught how to survive in the Arctic. He also attended leadership school, where he learned to lead other troops in the squadron.
Alaska was very important at that time because not only was the Korean War, but there was we had a Cold War with Russia at that time, and they were always concerned about being attacked by the Russians, and so we were trained to go out and be able to protect the base. And in order for that training, you would never know when it's going to happen, but a siren would go off, and most of the time it would be like maybe midnight or 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and you had to get up, grab your. All year in the mountains, they had bunkers built into the ground. You couldn't see them where the command post would be, where they gave all the orders. And you were surrounded the base, and you were taught to protect the base in case of an attack. That was one of the things we were trained to do, and we were also trained to be able to live out there.
Mr. Good also was on temporary duty in Korea. He worked on a supply plane flying foods to various American bases set up in Korea. Mr. Good recalls a time flying in Korea when his plane malfunctioned.
Happened to me one time. We were flying from Seattle, Washington to Alaska, and as we were flying, I was looking out the one window there, and I seen this smoke and fire, and one of our engines caught fire. We lost that engine, and we had to make a forced landing. And
Mr. Good landed in Port Harding, British Columbia, a small lumbering village. He and his fellow troops stayed in a community center until they could fly out.
Another life-threatening experience Mr. Good shared happened when he was stationed in Alaska.
one time when we were going out on alert, I was in a truck. I was up front with the driver, and there was either 4 or 6 fellows in the back of the truck. And it was raining real hard, and in Alaska at that time there were no paved roads. Everything was dirt roads. That's why it was called the last frontier. And it was raining real hard. And on those trucks, they're just small windshields, and the wipers weren't that great at that time. And we were going around this bend, and all of a sudden, when we get around this bend, here is a train coming. The driver slammed on the brakes, but we just kept sliding. I could see this train coming. I thought, oh, this is it. And we hit right in back of the engine, about the first car in back of the engine, and it threw us over, rolled the truck over. I felt this in my face, and I thought, boy, I'm really bleeding. And I put my hands up over my face, and here we were. It threw us like in a swamp area, and the water came through the truck, through the floorboards there. The water come up, and that's what hit me in the face. And a couple of the guys in the back were hurt, and we were out there and nowhere, nobody come along. We must have been sitting there for at least 2 hours, and then a Jeep came along, and he took the 2 guys that were hurt into the base, and then they came out and picked the rest of us up.
He also had to face the fact of being so far away from his families for a long period of time. In order to deal with these problems, he wrote letters back from home to keep in touch with them. Also, some activities that the men could participate in during their time in the service. One of Mr. Good's favorites was baseball. Mr. Good has said that he was able to play a lot of baseball during the war, which was great for him because he was very interested in sports. It was especially nice for him because as he traveled around to different bases, he was able to play against different teams and meet a lot of new people.
When the war ended, Mr. Good had said that he was not very surprised because he had thought that it should have been over sooner than it was. He was very happy when their unit heard the news, and he decided to make the decision to not stay in the service any longer and head home. He flew home from a base where he was stationed in New York for a short period of time. When Mr. Good returned home, everyone was very accepting to him.
When Mr. Good returned home, he married his current wife, Barbara, in 1959, and then had 3 children named Gloria, Pat, and Joe.
During Mr. Good's time in the service, he had received 3 medals in recognition. One was the Korean Service Medal, which was received for the time he had spent in Korea. He received the National Defense Medal for his time in the service during the Korean War, and he received another medal for the time spent during the Korean War. Mr. Good also received a letter of accommodation while he was stationed in Alaska from Lieutenant Colonel Dury and Major Johnson.